Awesome sauce. So we're going to get started because we're like right at the top of the hour. And if other people trickle in, then, you know, you all, I'll catch everybody up. But for those who are here, welcome. This is, it's like webinar slash workshop, because, we do invite the participation of those who are here, but it is handling the interview. We will hear from David as well as Veronica. David is our education director. Veronica is one of our instructors for our full immersive web development full-time class. And they will be doing a mock coding interview. Let me, make sure it's specific. A mock coding interview with best practices. And as like I said, people come in if there's any questions about, how to handle the interview or how to, engage with these best practices, then I will, bring that up. But for the most part, I do want to just give a little shout out to DigitalCrafts. So what is DigitalCrafts? Of course, we are a boot camp, an educational boot camp, and we're rated one of the best online boot camps by Course Report in 2021. We have courses in web development, which is, the one that we have here. We also have UX design and cybersecurity. Also, 1 second, somebody want to get in. Awesome. We offer live instruction with our courses and online flexibility. So a lot of things are hands-on. It's guided learning experiences with our instructors, and also we have full-time and part-time classes, especially via our web development classes. So why DigitalCrafts? Like, why should you come to DigitalCrafts? Like I said, effective hands-on training. So you're going to get a lot of there'll be projects, interaction with our instructors is there. And our curriculum is crafted with beginners in mind. Speaking of such, it's one really awesome thing. Speaking of beginners, we have intro courses, so if you're coming in, you don't know anything about, web development or cyber or UX design, you can go through our free intro courses. They are highly recommended, because it establishes a great foundation, a great baseline for you coming into the course, so you can understand what is going to be taught. So get that ground running, because the boot camp can be fast, it can be rigorous and very challenging, but it is very doable. And you want to set yourself up for a good experience by doing the intro course. And also, our students come first. We definitely want to put our students first. So we have different layers of support throughout the program that we offer our students, and also through career services, and like having a cohort manager there along the way as you go through this process. Now, some typical questions that we get. I'm going to speak specifically for the web development. Okay, because this is a web development webinar / workshop. The cost of tuition for part-time, the tuition is $9,950. For the full-time, the cost of tuition is $14,950. And we do have scholarships that are available. We have a You Belong in Tech scholarship that's available for both full-time and part-time. That is automatic for anyone who's Black, Latinx, or women. You automatically get that. We also have a Builder scholarship that you can apply for. The Builder scholarship is not stackable with You Belong in Tech, just FYI. But the Builder scholarship is an essay portion, is an essay scholarship, where you write about how you use tech to better the community around you, or how it can be used to better the people around you. Or you can go the lending route. We have a third-party lender called Climb Credit that you can, use to finance your class if you would choose to do so. And like I said, do you need to have any prior experience or knowledge? No, we have we have intro courses for you that you can go through. You can find those.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you please check the chat, because I think someone is saying inappropriate stuff.
Oh yeah, let's get that guy out of here. Thank you, sir. I appreciate you. I appreciate that for sure. All right, so with that said, oh snap, what happened to my can you guys see my screen still?
Yes, we can.
Do you see the presentation or something different?
No. Your desktop.
There we go. How about now? You see the presentation
Yes,
again?
we can see it now.
Okay, thank you. You all are awesomeness. So like I said, we have the intro course that's there for beginners. And then the type of support, we have a vast amount of support. What I'm going to do, I'm going to put in the chat, I'm going to put in chat the link to a free informational call that you can do to get in contact with one of our enrollment coordinators, and we will like go through like the whole thing with you if you want to ask questions about the career services and the finances and go deeper into that. Cool. Awesome. Let me see if that's my last slide. Oh, yeah. And I'll put in the chat the call information, but if you want to reach out via email, you can just email us at hello@digitalcrafts.com, and you'll be connected with one of our enrollment coordinators. So with that said, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and then we're gonna go into David and Veronica's hands, and we're gonna have some fun. All right, you guys. All right, in your hands, David and Veronica.
All right. Veronica, if you'd like to start, introduce yourself and let us know who you are.
Okay, my name is Veronica Lino, and I'm one of the instructors here at DigitalCrafts. I'm a full-time web instructor. I've been here for a little bit over 4 years. I've seen a lot of people go through the camp and be successful, and it's always so wonderful to see people go from where they were to like being a full stack developer. So I hope that this is going to be a great workshop for you guys.
And my name is David Hiller. I'm Director of Education at DigitalCrafts. I try to make sure that everything from the curriculum onward is aligned to what you would need in the future. We work with businesses and just people in general to make sure that we provide the highest level of curriculum. So that way, at the end of the day, you have what it takes to get into the field if that's the route that you would want to go. All right. With that being said, today what we're hoping to do is we're hoping to cover our mock interview. So today Veronica is going to take the role of the interviewer and I'm going to be interviewed. And we're going to try to get through the algorithm portion of a interview process. So she's going to present a question and we'll talk about it. And at key points, we'll interject with kind of thought processes on how to make that effective for you, things that would look really good, things that you should try to avoid, and things along those lines. So if we can, I'll go ahead and share my screen so that way you can see my code. And there we go. The first thing you will notice on this screen, unfortunately, is that it is just a .txt. So I'm not going to have anything that kind of helps me in terms of like figuring out, what I can write with and things like that. And the only other thing that I'll mention ahead of time is that today I'm going to be coding in Python. So that way it's a little bit easier, more recognizable as we go through the code itself. The purpose today is to really focus on the interview as opposed to the solution method. And so following the steps, figuring out how to really kind of handle it from beginning to end, that's what we're really taking a look at today. So I'm going to hand it off to you.
All right, great. Well, David, it's nice to meet you. I'm glad you're here today. So what I want you to do today is I want you to write a function that reverses a number. So this function is we're going to pass into the function a number, and it should return the reverse of that number. And you can use any language that you would like, that you're comfortable with, and that's fine.
Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do at this stage is I need to get clarification about the requirements, because at this stage, the question's been asked, it's been posed, and the thing that we want to do so often when we start coding is we want to jump right into it, because we want to be able to showcase we know everything from beginning to end and that we're ready to go and everything is like, we just knew it from the moment that it began. But jumping right in is one of the things that's going to actually hurt you the most. Take the time to make sure that you do it correctly and answer all the parts. So the first part that we're going to do is clarification. And what I'm going to take a look at in particular is I'm going to ask a few questions to make sure that I really understand what is being given and what is going to be what is going to be returned. So let's go ahead and jump in there. Real quickly, the goal is to write a function to reverse a number. How am I receiving the data? Am I going to be receiving it as a number type, an integer, or something like that? Or how would I receive that data?
So you're going to receive it as, that's a great question, receive it as an integer. So it's not going to be any type of, well, actually it could be a decimal place, but for right now, let's just work on an integer and then we can expand it a little bit later on. But for right now, you're going to be passed an integer type to the function.
And how would you like that to be returned?
As an integer. So the data type should stay the same.
Okay. So right now I've got the how I'm going to receive it, how I'm going to push it back. A few things I'm going to need to do now is I actually need to go ahead and start testing out a few test cases. And this is going to come in twofold. The first idea behind it is I need to make sure that I kind of clarify anything that's going to be kind of straightforward to make sure I understand the problem. And then from there, I'm going to go ahead and try to, one second. There we go. My screen should be able to see be seen again. The idea behind it is I should be able to go ahead and take a look at any of the test cases. I'm going to start off with an easy set to make sure that I know what I'm doing. And then from there, I'm going to try some of the weirder things. So the first one I'm going to try is maybe the number 4532. If you were to give me that integer, what you're looking for, I believe, is 2354, correct?
Correct. That's correct.
So we'll go ahead and take a look at that. 54. Nope, that's what's going wrong. There we go. All right. And then from there, can this also be a negative integer?
It can, yes.
Okay. So since it can be a negative integer, if I were to do something like negative 1234, I should expect to get back negative 4321.
Exactly.
Correct?
Yes. So whatever the sign is, the return, you're going to keep that sign. So if I've given you like a negative number, then the return value should also have a negative number. So whatever the original sign was, you're going to keep that sign.
So keep the sign. Perfect. All right, the next thing that I'm trying to think of weird cases. And one of the ones that come up to me as a weird case is if I were to do something like this. So my first thought was, I was like, okay, I'll just start going through numbers. 1 would give me 1, 2 would give me 2. And then the first time I get something weird is the number 10.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I got to the number 10, if I were to flip it perfectly, I would get the number 0, 1. And I don't think that that's what I would want, correct? So I'm actually going to return the integer, so it should return just 1.
Right. So any like leading zeros, you just want to return the end of the number. So if you have 0, 0, 2, 3, you would turn 2, 3.
Perfect. And right now, though, we're not going to talk about it. If I can build an extension as I go along, maybe if I were to get decimals, but you had said that we're only dealing with integers. So I'm going to handle that. All right.
Initially, but keep that in mind that we will modify maybe eventually to be able to handle integers. So just be forward thinking in your solution in order to include integers maybe later on.
Okay, awesome. Now, the next thing that I'm going to take a look at is from here. Notice that when I went through this, I wrote out all the test cases. I now have them for later. These are things that I can run through my code. I can talk about them, and I can do them live when I've actually written my code. So that's a good spot. The other thing that I've really looked at is whenever I deal with a different data type, each data type kind of comes with its own warning when you kind of start with it. For example, we're dealing with numbers right now. So my first question is like, what happens if it's positive? What happens if it's negative? What should we do if it's 0? A lot of times 0 kind of gives us something weird just because it's neither positive nor negative. Well, it's actually both positive and negative at the same time. And then what if it's a decimal? And so from each one of those cases, I'm generally going to ask each one of those just to make sure I know what's going on with that. All right. So that's stage 1 is kind of the clarification. At this stage, I have enough information to know kind of what's going on, and I have enough information to know that I feel comfortable with how to answer this. Now, the thing that I recommend is when you're doing an interview, write it out step by step. Talk about it, make sure that you kind of explain what you're doing, and just write out exactly what you're going to do. Because the problem is when we're nervous, our brain doesn't think well. It doesn't like thinking on the spot. So the more that you have things written down and ready to go, you can follow that train of thought later on. But the other thing is, if I'm doing something that's wildly wrong, the interviewer may actually step in and kind of identify something that might be a little bit better for me to consider, things like that. Or if there's a case that I'm not considering when I'm making the code, sometimes they actually may give some of that information. So, those are really kind of good thoughts. So here's what I'm going to say and jump in with this part of the interview. I'm going to go ahead and jump in here and say, I'm going to take in a number n. From there, I need to probably convert this to a string. From there, I really need to check that string to see maybe if the position 0 is 0. Check to see if position 0 in the string is a negative. If it is, I'll go ahead and flag that. Next, I'm going to go through and I'm going to start looping through the string, because if I were to go through piece by piece, like if I look at 4, 5, 3, 2, I'm going to loop through and I'm going to say, okay, take 4, then take 5, then take 3, and then take 2. And I'm just going to add the number string to the front of the number each time. So I'm going to loop through the string and add the number string to the front of each number. So if you just gave me the number, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put the number 4 down. The next number that comes in is 5, so I'll hold 5 and then glue the rest of it back in. And then I'm going to put the number 3 to the front, and then I'm going to put the number 2 to the front. So I'm always going to add the number to the front. Let's write it to the front of the string.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, there's something like I don't understand.
Yeah, what's up?
Like, what does it mean to check if the position of 0 is negative?
That's a great question. So when we take a look at strings in general, the way that they're kind of worded, if I were to have like this number in a string, I know that it's a string because it's got the quotes around it. Each one of these have a position. And so this is position 0. And this is position 1 and position 2. We call those basically indices. And so what I'm saying is, anytime I have a negative number, that negative number should be in that original position, which in this case would be 0th position. So if I have the negative 182, I need to check to see if that first symbol or first index of the string happens to be negative. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Thank you.
Yes, sir. So we'll loop through the string and add the number string to the front. And then from there, I need to do a final check.
Before you go on, can you actually close down your terminal at the bottom so you have more screen space?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you. Final check to make sure there are no leading zeros. And then I need to convert it back to an int. Integer. And from there, if it is negative, make it negative. Okay, so the reason why I did this is now I need to actually start going ahead and coding. And this is the part of the interview process where things get really, really hectic. And that's why I wrote down this structure, because now that I've kind of thought about everything that I needed to do in terms of these numbers, I see if I were to take 4, okay, next they give me 5, then 3, then 2. It makes sense that if I just add it to the front, it will make eventually what I need. And as long as I handle this negative sign appropriately, things will be good. So I think that will be fine. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and jump in and start by making a function. So in Python, we do def to identify something, and I'm going to reverse number. And the integer that I'm going to take in is n, colon, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so now I've got this kind of situation up and ready to go. Thing that I would recommend is as you're typing everything out, try to use as clear variables as possible. The more that you use clearly named functions and variables, the more that your interviewer can see into your head as you're going along. So I'm going to keep talking and going through this. So the first thing that I said I'm going to do is I'm going to take in a number, which I did. I'm taking an n, and the first thing I need to do is turn this into a string. So I'm going to have a variable called string n. And this is going to be equal to the string of n. Okay. The next thing that I'm going to do I just lost the ability to share my screen.
I'll try again. Try again.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so I've got the string here, and that will handle that. Okay, so the next thing that I said that I'm going to need to do is that I'm going to need to check to see if there's a negative. That's what I said there. So I'm checking to see if position 0 is a negative. Right now, that means that I need to have a flag for this. So I'm going to call it a negative flag. And right now, we're just going to assume that it's false. It may turn out to be true later. And then I'm going to say something like if string n, and this is going to be of 0, the original thing. And if that happens to be equal to a negative sign, then we need to do the following. We need to say that negative flag was actually equal to true. Okay. And then from there, I need to say, okay, string of n, because the problem is at this stage, we need to actually remove that negative because we're not going to use that anymore. So I'm actually going to slice that string. And I'm going to just take from 1 to the end. And in Python, that's how I would do that. And then I'm basically ready to say my result is equal to an empty string. And so at this stage, I've taken in the number, I've converted it to a string, I've checked to see if position 0 is negative. If so, I'll go ahead and flag that. And now I need to go ahead and loop through the string and add the number string to the front of the current string. So I'm just going to go ahead and start building out that loop. I can say to remind me that this is a string, I'm going to call it letter in string n. I'm going to do the following. So I'm going to take each one and I'm going to say, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, res is equal to whatever letter I just got plus whatever res was before. That will make sure that it always adds to the front. And that should loop through the entire thing. Okay, that actually covers that entire area nicely. Next thing up that we can go ahead and do is we can go ahead and check to see whether that beginning thing is 0. So just like before, I can go ahead and take this idea that I used to check for the negative flag, look for the 0th thing, and check to see if that's a 0. If it is, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing I did here, where I'm going to say, okay, you know what, the string is actually 1 less than it was before. So I'm going to say while res of 0 is equal to, ironically, 0, we're going to do the following. We're going to say res is actually equal to whatever res was before, but we're just going to make sure that it starts at the next element. And it's going to keep doing that until it eats away all of the zeros. Now, in the moment, I do realize that that might be a problem, because what if it eats up everything? Everything would be all gone, and then I wouldn't have a number, and I'd be really, really sad because I would probably miss that case. So I have to not do that. At this stage, I need to do one quick check. If the res left me with nothing now, that's a problem. So if there's nothing left, what number did I actually have this whole time? Well, I had 0, because 0 would have gotten eliminated and eaten all the way up with nothing left behind. So I'm going to go ahead and have to do that. I'm going to say res is actually equal to, in this case, 0. And now I'm clear with that. From here, The only thing that I have to do, I've now done the check for leading zeros, and now I just need to convert back to an integer. And from there, if it was negative, make it negative. So I'm going to say, okay, the result is actually equal to the int of result, which I've pretty much made sure that it has to be that. And then from there, I'm going to do if negative flag. So if this is true, we're going to take res and equal that to res times -1. And then we will return res. And that should be my overall process. Now, the thing is, before we jump too far, I need to actually make sure that it does what I said it was going to do. Because at the end of the day, I really need to make sure that we actually go through and make sure that our process made sense. And your brain will not want to do this. Your brain will be really excited because it will be like, I'm done with the interview. I did it. I have a solution. And then you're going to be like, brain, please check that solution. It's going to be like, no, we're good. And you really need to go through line by line. And that's why we did this at the very beginning, where we identified some possibilities of things that we would want to check just to make sure that they work. So I'm going to use the number 4532, and I'm going to keep going through. And I'm just going to follow exactly 4532, exactly what I said. So n is 4532. That means that right now I've got 4532 here. And this one is not negative, so that stays false because we don't have to deal with that. So we're not even going into this area. And then result is equal to this, so that stays exactly as is. And then for each letter in the string, it's going to start off with 4. And so it's going to say, okay, our result, which is currently this, is now equal to 4 plus whatever it was before, which was just blank. So it's going to be 4. And then the next one that it's going to add is 5. So it's going to say, okay, it's no longer 4 here. It's now going to be 5 plus whatever we had before, which is 4. So that's 54. And then the next one is going to be the number 3. So it's going to be whatever it was before is equal to 3 plus 54, which is 354. And then the last one is 2. It's going to say, okay, whatever it was before, that's going to be 2 plus 354, which is 2354. I don't have any leading zeros, so that's fine. So I don't have to do this. I don't have to jump into here. I would turn that into an integer. It didn't have a negative flag, so I would return 2354, and that does work. Okay, so that did hold. I can easily go through and check one of the other ones. In fact, let's just go ahead and do that one really quick. The -1, 2, 3, 4. Once again, right here, -1, 2, 3, 4. Negative flag is false. If the string is equal to negative, so this time it is, the negative flag is now true. And we're going to take and snip that off. So now it's just 1, 2, 3, 4 from here. This part I know works exactly as is. I checked that last time. I don't have anything here because I'm going to have 4, 3, 2, 1. So I don't have to go into that. I don't have to go into this. I'm going to turn that in. So now I have the integer of 4, 3, 2, 1. And then the negative flag was true this time. So I'm going to multiply that by -1. And I'm going to get out a -4, 3, 2, 1. So in general, I've seen that this works. And now I'm kind of comfortable. And notice how I was kind of talking through my code line by line. My interviewer didn't have much to say because I'm kind of handling that portion because it's something that I know is part of the problem-solving process. I need to handle this line by line and make sure that I test exactly what it said it was supposed to do. And I've checked it now, and I've made sure that it meets all of those conditions that we saw before. And so at this stage, I would say, okay, I actually think that this is probably pretty solid. What do you think currently right now, based on what you've seen?
I think that this is a great solution, David. And so this is a side note for the class. So at this point, typically interviewers will start looking like, okay, you were really comfortable with that. So I'm going to start changing things a little bit to make it a little bit harder to see how you think outside the box. But before we get there, David, I'd like to talk about optimization. I'd like to talk about two things. One is if we were to alter this and maybe add in decimal places. So now I'm not passing in an integer, but I'm passing in a real number or a float to the function. How would your logic change with that? And then afterwards, can you talk about big O complexity and the spacing complexity of your solution?
Okay, so basically, based on what you're saying, I'm going to start off with the decimal part. Taking a look at the decimal, I now notice that there are some things. From the math side of things, decimals can be represented in different ways, and especially because our beginning part is turning that directly into a string, I do need to be careful with that. And so let's take a look at some of the examples that could have shown up based on this. Okay, so those are the ones that I would see. Now let's talk about what they might look like, and just to make sure that we have the clarification here. So if I wanted to flip this, this actually should look like 5, 4, 3, 2, and then I actually wouldn't write the next 2, correct? Because my trailing zeros would need to be removed, right?
Right.
Okay, and then in this case, I'm sure that once I change it to back into a float, that it would be fine, but this one would be 5, 4, 3, 2 as well, because I wouldn't have to really worry about that one too much. This one here, I would say is going to be 6, 5, 4, 3.21.
Yeah.
This one matches one of the things that we've already seen, so this should be negative 432. And then most of the other ones are pretty straightforward. That's going to be 32.1 with a negative up front. And then this one is kind of the weird one out. This is going to be 78 and then come back around with the negative. Okay, right. So I've seen all those different cases, and notice how I'm really taking into account all the different ways that maybe it could have tried to get through to me to pass forward. I'd imagine that these cases are going to kind of handle themselves just because of how floats kind of work. So I don't have to worry about them so much as this one right here, and this one, and probably this one. And so let's take a look at the modification here. Right now I'm taking in the number. That wouldn't change. I need to convert this to a string. That part would not likely change either. I need to see exactly what's kind of there. Now the question is, does this part still hold? Even in a decimal, is the first thing that we're going to run across a negative? And the case is yes. If I'm going to have a negative, it's going to happen before that decimal ever happens and before anything is actually a problem. So I think that that should be fine. Now, the problem that I did notice is that this one right here could now be a problem. I need to check to see whether or not it led with zeros, but also I need to also do a final check to make sure there are no ending zeros, but only if they happen after a decimal. If all, and then I need to do another thing here. If all values were lost, I would need to remove the decimal point, because that wouldn't help me at that stage. So if I lose that all, and then I would just convert that, and instead of integer, I would convert back to a float. And if it's negative, then I would make it negative. That actually should handle everything that I saw up here. The only area that really comes in to be much of a difference is if it has that trailing set of zeros based on the way that we currently coded that. So that's the only place that I would see something change. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, just for the sake of time, I understand your steps and that looks really good. And I completely understand your train of thought with that. But could we go ahead and talk about the complexity, like the space complexity and the time complexity of your solution?
Okay, so the time complexity, the way that I'm looking at it is basically I do have a loop that I'm looping through. And so as my number gets larger and larger, I'm going to have to do more and more within that loop to kind of handle that. So that's usually an indicator of linear time in this case, because the longer that that loop is getting, the more that it's going to have to process and the more operations that's going to do. So if the length of it was m, then I would expect the number of operations to increase by a factor of m. So I would go with linear on that. I'm not seeing anything else that would actually come in here and change that too much. Okay. As far as space complexity, I'm really saving everything to a variable. and just kind of one single variable. So that in itself is a sort of constant because it's not changing. That everything that's happening is changing in that one constant variable. So
Right.
that would be constant for me.
All right, awesome. So I have a question. On line 41, you've created a new variable to store the reverse of your number, basically your string. So is there any way that you can think of that you could actually reverse this string in place?
So in place reversal is pretty common, and that's actually an interesting question. There are a few ways that I could do it. One is probably that I could do much of the same thing, actually kind of use the same string and keep track of it as I go through which one I've done and then snip it off. So it's all part of the same one. It kind of adds to the end, almost creates a palindrome, and then cuts off what wasn't needed. There's a few things that I might run into a concern, but that's the quickest and easiest way that I could kind of do that. Just thinking outside the box. Now, these questions are generally the ones, as an aside, that are a little bit more stressful because they're on the spot. There's something in your code, and notice that it's going to change your logic around somehow. And that's a problem because you've now come up with this flawless idea. You had it perfected, you had it ready to go, and now there's going to be areas that you now have to think on the spot about because they need to see if you're able to kind of handle things that kind of create more curveballs. And a lot of times areas that I would look at are areas where I would expect some sort of, could you do this in less space or less time, generally come up to be pretty consistent things. And in this case, I would agree. The result line is kind of an interesting one because it's easier to code that way, but it is eating up a little bit of additional space. So this one would make sense that this is an area where, this could be something that you could go up against. Generally, what I do recommend is as you're practicing for interview questions, do have kind of things on hand to know ways that you can kind of reduce things to make them a little bit easier to handle.
Yeah. The other curveball that I would actually throw at someone if I gave them this question, because this question is not on a difficulty level, it's not like extremely difficult, right? But you could start throwing things at the person that could twist things. Like you said, you have to think on the spot, like do this in place, right? That's one question. The other question is like, okay, you have a great solution here using loops. Can you figure out a way to do this using recursion?
Yeah. And that's actually a pretty common one. And so reversal of a string is actually a pretty common recursion technique. And so the fact that I jumped in originally with this is kind of the next thing that I would kind of bring up, because a lot of times, especially when you start off in an interview with the pseudocode and you're kind of explaining what's going on, the interviewer might be like, okay, well, you're going to have to code this as well, and be like, absolutely, I'm firmly aware, but I just want to make sure that it's written down. And the other thing that I generally recommend is that when you start off an interview, when I go to write the first answer, I have found that it is better to write something than nothing at all. And so my first thought when I saw this question was, okay, there's probably going to be something recursion that I could do here because I've seen that trick before. But I want to make sure that I get something on the code that I can walk away and say, I have coded a solution. And so generally one of the things that I recommend kind of talking about with your interviewer is, I think that there's going to be a better way for me to handle this in the future. But right now, let me go ahead and write this one up just so that way we get a solution on paper and that way we clear it. And usually that's actually a really good technique because that shows that you're definitely going to meet the deadline. But then, with the time that you have allotted, you can now refine and make that a little bit better. And that's where this next stage usually would come in. I would go in and actually try to take this and make it a little one step better. As far as some of the complexity, it won't change much of the complexity, but it will show off my skill if I were able to do this in a more recursive way.
Yeah.
Because at this stage, it would be able to show that I could use that. And it's something that I've seen before and that's something that I'm familiar with.
And I would actually ask how the complexity would change space complexity when you're using a recursive solution. Mm-hmm. So versus like a linear, like a iterative solution where you're going through loops, how does that change? Because it does change the space complexity, maybe not the time complexity, but the space complexity will change.
Yeah. And so those are all the things that, like, as I start getting ready for this process, those are the areas that I see would kind of change that those are the on-the-spot sort of thinkings. And those are where I would recommend, when you're focusing time and effort going into the interview process, when you're done with a piece of code and you're really excited that you've kind of done it, as you're practicing and getting yourself ready for the interview, ask yourself the kinds of questions that you've been hearing today. Where could I change this, and where could I improve this, and how could I make this better? Because when you think about those questions on your own time ahead of time, when you get into the actual stage where you actually see it in front of you, you've now built this procedure. And you now know from beginning to end how to kind of approach that from top to bottom. And that's really what if there's something that I would want you to take away from this today, is please go into an interview having a procedure from top to bottom. Be ready to go with, here's exactly how I'm going to do this. And so what I recommend for me is, knowing how I stress out about things and how my brain is like, no, this is really stressful right now. I'm really, really scared. I want to make sure that I do everything in my favor to have that prepared. And so that's why I wrote the question out right from the beginning. I check to make sure that I know exactly what's going to be returned and given. I write out the test cases to make sure I've got the clarity. I write out the code. Once I wrote out the code, I didn't divert from this in any way, shape, and form. I followed and coded exactly what I said I was going to. And then from there, I now create that sort of code, but now I know that I'm in the stage where things are less on the spot. And so to help me prepare for that, generally, once I get to this stage, as I'm going through the other thing and I'm just coding and I'm kind of, I hate to say it, there's almost like a cruise control to it. Like, you know what you need to code based on what you've written up above. Now I'm going to take the time to start thinking at the end, was there a better way to do this? Is there something that I could do to make this a little bit more effective? And then also answering the questions that do come up with this, especially since this one is such a, on the simpler side. This is a good area where we can really get into the depth of it, as opposed to the, what's actually happening here. Okay. All right.
Awesome sauce. Thanks so much, Veronica and David. I do want to let people who are here ask questions if needed. If you do have any questions, you can do the raise hand thingy or put in the chat. And I just want to give a few quick moments for that. But yeah, so it was awesomeness. Thank you once again, David and Veronica. I do want to say for everyone who will be watching this later on, or even now, if you do have questions about our web development part-time classes or full-time classes, or any of our classes for that matter, feel free to reach out to us. You can call us at hello@digitalcrafts.com. Rena has a question, actually. 1 second, Rena. I'm going to unmute you, and then you can ask your question, or you can put it in the chat.
Okay. My question is, how do you handle an interview question that you just have no idea what the answer could be?
Great
Getting
question.
started, yeah. Like, so if you don't know how to get started, so that's when you start, to me, you start putting down as many thoughts as you can. Your interviewer is not there to hurt you. They're there actually to help you. One of your biggest roadblocks is like not saying anything. If you're just sitting there looking at a screen or a whiteboard, you're not saying anything, they can't help you. They can't read your thoughts. So you have to start talking. You have to start saying, well, just throwing out some ideas. And if you're going in the wrong direction, they will steer you in the right direction.
Awesome sauce. Any other questions? She gave you a thumbs up. Rena gave you a thumbs up. Good job. David, you have a question?
We can't hear you, David.
Yeah, you're muted.
Can you unmute him?
Oh, let me. Oh, okay, gotcha, David. Let me see 1 second. Yes, I would. All right. There you go, David.
A few other things I would recommend in those cases is that's where I would say that first stage where I'm going back and forth and trying to figure out exactly what's being asked, that's a good time, because one of our problem solving strategies that we get from mathematics is like, can you draw a picture? Can you represent this in some way? And sometimes when I'm actually going through the problem, when I do it enough times, I start seeing that there's almost like a protocol with it. And so I would say that there are two types of styles of question and why we may not be able to answer it. One is that maybe they've given us something that we just don't have an answer to. Maybe it's something from graph theory and we're not familiar with how to represent graphs in our code. That's unfortunate. In that case, there's not much that I can do because I'm not going to be able to make up something that I've just never seen before content-wise. So if you're not familiar with like the data structure and things like that, honestly, I would be a little bit more honest. Like maybe this is something that I've not seen before, but I'm going to go ahead and try it based on what it is that I see and know about what it is that you're giving me. But in most cases, what you're going to run up against is a problem-solving technique that's a little bit more straightforward, that has accessibility for multiple areas. And that's a good style of interview question because now you can access it in different ways. When that's the case, I definitely recommend doing the problem several times over on paper, seeing if you can't come up with a solution and what that end result is, and then asking yourself, what was it that I just did to actually get that answer? How did I visualize and write that out? And then that's what I was actually putting in steps, because sure, some things like I'm going to have to turn it into a string came from the computer science side of things. But when I looked at it, I was just like, well, I just need to keep gluing the number at the end until I get the answer, and it just kind of shifts over. And that's how I problem solve this one. And so that's where I would kind of differentiate. If it's something that you've seen before, please talk out with your interviewer, because they will definitely give a little bit more clarification if you're going really awry. Or, as you're going through, the more that you actually talk and you're out loud and you're saying things, the more that they can see inside your head, the more that they can actually give the proper amount of, thought process, especially if you're just not seeing kind of a critical piece that maybe is a little bit more obvious.
And when you're, and when you're also, I'd like to explain it. So when you're going through those examples, just like David said, of trying to figure out like how to do this and you're looking for patterns, because you can see the pattern, then you can code the pattern, right? Like you can see that what I'm doing is I'm reversing this. If I can turn this into a string, I know that I can reverse those letters, right? You can start seeing patterns. So when you're giving those examples, like you give one example, like what am I doing in this example versus this example, you're looking for a pattern, like what's happening that I can take that pattern and I can code it. So, and the other thing is that when you first start coding, you might come out with the worst, like not the worst solution, but like a brute force solution that may not be the best, most optimized solution. But once you get something, just get something on the screen or on the board, it may not be the best one at first. And then you can talk about that. Well, I'm going to do this brute force way first so that I have some solutions so you can see that I can solve the problem, but it may just not be optimized just yet. And once I get that brute force, then I will try to start going back and making doing things to make it a little bit better, make it a little bit more optimized as far as space and as far as time. And you can talk about that. Well, this solution is using multiple loops, like loops inside of loops, like nested loops. So maybe this is not the best solution, but I'm going to come back to this and see if I can like clean it up some to bring down like the time complexity.
Legit stuff. Awesomeness. Any more questions? Going once, going twice. All right, so awesomeness. Thank you so much, David. Thank you so much, Veronica. It was a pleasure. Thank you all for joining us. And until next time, have a great one. Basis.
Bye.
Bye.